And we start part two of the Dreamcast haul where we left off last week with Hoyle's Casino. I'm Mr. Mega Man fan. Like, share, comment, subscribe. All of those things help the channel grow. And we're looking at Dreamcast games that I picked up at Ben's Game Zone. He had just gotten in a shipment of new Dreamcast titles, and I took full advantage of that and picked up quite a few that I didn't already have. I've managed to whittle down the number of Dreamcast games I still need to double digits, although I'm really not looking forward to some of the few that are left, because they are games like Mars Matrix, which are just unfairly expensive. I mean, I don't even know if it wouldn't be better to get an optical drive emulator and play them that way instead, because an ODE might just be cheaper than paying for a copy of Mars Matrix. At least Hoyle's Casino was not an expensive title. I'm somewhat grateful for that. So if you can pick up a cheap Dreamcast game, it's always worth it to do so. Anything that doesn't cost you an arm, a leg, a foot, a hand, and an ear, yes, go ahead and get yourself a copy of that. And the man who sold the game to me at Ben's was not Ben himself, but he was kind enough to take out the disc and show it to me and say, you know, this one's a little scratched up. You might want to check this one first when you get home. I didn't. I went in alphabetical order, but I'm happy to say that despite the scratches, it worked just fine. And here we have Jeremy McGrath's Supercross 2000, another reasonably affordable game by Sega Dreamcast standards, with complete copies going for as low as $10. You may not know who Jeremy McGrath is these days, but back in the 90s, he was the king of motocross, winning 7 Supercross championships in the AMAs from 1993 to 2000. He hasn't won any since then, but he did win a gold medal at the 2004 Summer X Games, which is basically the Olympic Games of his field. So good on him, and he continued to dabble in other motorsports besides motocross ever since those days. So he's still an avid driver, rider, biker, whatever you want to call him at this point, but he's just not as prominently featured in the media as he was around then, because at the time, if you were going to do any kind of motocross racing game on any console, you were probably putting Jeremy McGrath's name on it. That's just how big he was. This one's pretty fun. The controls are a little hard to get down at first, but I think I'll play it more than once. It's worth the $10. Next up on the list, we have the next Tetris. Yes, next was next, and it is a online-enabled Dreamcast game, which makes it a little bit difficult to fully enjoy these days because a lot of the features of the next Tetris are no longer available, not unless you have some sort of Raspberry Pi emulator and some sort of broadband to modem converter, which is a lot of trouble to go through just to find somebody else with a Dreamcast and a copy of this game. I'm going to say it's probably not worth it to do that. So the best thing you can do with the next Tetris is play classic Tetris. Other than that, it's just Tetris. So do you need to go out of your way to own this one? Probably not, unless you're collecting Dreamcast games and trying to get a complete set. In which case, sure, why not, I suppose. If you want to spend $20 for a complete copy, then go for it. That's your bag. Do what you want to do. Here we have a rather generic racing game, of which there were many on consoles like the Dreamcast, PlayStation, and Nintendo 64. It was a time for racing games. There were no shortage of them on any platform. This one goes for a little less than the next Tetris, A complete copy will set you back around 18 bucks. And I like Tetris enough that I would buy the next Tetris Online Edition just to play classic Tetris, but I can't really say the same about POD Speed Zone. There are better racing games. There are racing games with better loading times and graphics and overall presentation and things that don't leave me tongue tied trying to come up with anything good to say about POD Speed Zone. It's not spectacular. I mean, you can see the footage here for yourself. It doesn't wow me. It's like playing that Pod Racer Star Wars game, except not even as good as that. Maybe 1/10 as good as that. I would rather hear yippee as I was pod racing through episode 1 than play this game. Let's move on. Our next Dreamcast contender is Sierra Sports Maximum Pool. And I don't see what's so maximum about it because I don't see what this pool game offers that you can't get from virtually any other pool game, except maybe the online mode, which is no longer available as previously noted. Other than that, I guess if you want a pool game for your Dreamcast, you can go with this one. But it's going to set you back almost $20, maybe a little more, maybe a little less if you get it cheaper. If you find a lot of Dreamcast games and somebody doesn't know what they have, maybe you can score it for less than that. But yeah, it's just pool. This is not even a very visually stunning game of pool or one that has a really great soundtrack or some memorable characters or an endorsement from a pool legend. It's just pool, man. That's it. That's all it is. Now, this next one is kind of a good news, bad news situation. The bad news first is that Sword of the Berserk Guts Rage is one of the pricier Sega Dreamcast games. A complete copy could set you back $80, possibly even more. If you're really nutty and you want it sealed and never opened, it's going to be a $50 hike on top of that. So you could spend up to $130 for a copy of this game, let alone the insanity of one that's been graded and certified and all that other bull crap. But for $80, and this is a big but, this is a really fun 3D hack and slash game. If you want to play a game where you swing around a ridiculously large sword and beat up hordes of enemies that come at you and do combos with button presses, Sword of the Berserk lives up to the name. And guess what? It's time for another racing game. TNN on Dreamcast. And if you don't know what TNN is, it's the Nashville Network. So this is the Nashville Network's hardcore heat. TNN would later go on to be Spike TV, and Spike TV would later go on to be Paramount. So this network has changed names quite a few times, changed brands, changed identities, but it was known as TNN for quite a while, and it had quite a diversity of programming for a channel called the Nashville Network. Everything from extreme championship wrestling to motorsports, which led to this endorsed game. So, is it a good game? Is it a bad game? I don't know. It's not really either. It's just a generic racing game with a TNN license slapped on it. I don't think it's the worst thing you can buy for 15 bucks though. It definitely benefits from being a cheaper Dreamcast game. And here we have a racing game that's not nearly so cheap. This is Walt Disney's Magical Racing Tour, which includes a story mode. I was not really expecting that, but the story mode isn't that sophisticated. You just win races. You're not really doing anything that you wouldn't do playing standalone racing mode instead of the story mode. But this one will set you back about 30 bucks. Now, reportedly, there was a custom airbrushed Sega Dreamcast that was given away in promotion with this game. I think it was only in Europe, and only a handful of them still exist. So if you consider that an official Dreamcast variation, it's one of the rarest ones out there. It's a really weird choice for a tie in promotional variant of a Sega Dreamcast. You would think it would be something much bigger than Walt Disney's World Quest Magical Racing Tour, but I suppose just the Disney branding alone was enough for them to justify it. It's all right. It's a pretty thinly veiled Mario Kart ripoff, but at least it's a ripoff in all the right ways. Wetrix is a puzzle game that seemed to be on almost every platform of the era. I know I've also got a Nintendo 64 version of this one, and I believe there was also a PlayStation 1, but that might have only been in PAL territories. There was definitely a Game Boy Color version of it out there somewhere, but yes, this one is given the plus symbol because it's on Dreamcast. I'd have to pull out the Nintendo 64 or one of the other versions and compare it to see if the plus is justified, if it really adds more. But what it doesn't add is price, because this one goes for $22 while the Nintendo 64 version goes for double as much. So if it's got more features and costs less, this might be the way to go if you want to play this game. Speaking of X Games, yet again, here's something that would be appropriate at the Winter X Games. We've got some downhill snowboarding courtesy of Extreme Sports, spelled with an X in case the point wasn't obvious. This one, it's alright. I like downhill snowboarding games. I've never had a problem with them, and the controls on this one seem to be a little better than most of the ones I played. Probably not the greatest of all time, but it's tolerable, and it's not stupidly expensive. You can get this game for under $20, so go for it. Along with my Dreamcast haul, I had a couple of GameCube games that I picked up on this trip to Ben's Game Zone, so we're going to look at them real quick. Starting with FIFA Street 2, naturally the sequel to FIFA Street. And these games in the 2000s were an attempt to give normal sporting events some hip hop attitude and flair by removing them from the field and placing them in more urban environments, adding hip hop narrators like Exhibit, adding rap soundtracks, just trying to make it all a little more edgy. I suppose I enjoy that, even though it's pandering, and I know it, and I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. But I think the presentation is all right, and it has a more fun arcade feel to it than typical sports games. It's a little more like NBA Jam or NFL Blitz. So if you like that kind of stuff, FIFA Street 2 is all right. And at $24, it's certainly not the most expensive GameCube game. And finally, on part two, I have City Racer, which is another generic racing game. Sadly, this one didn't even come with the instruction manual, but the box was in good shape, the disc was in good shape, and it's kind of a hard game to find for a decent price. A complete copy can set you back $63, so I was happy to take it even without a manual and just be done with it. And if I get a manual and complete it later, so be it.